Good morning, everyone. Hello, how are you doing? When you hear the word power, what is it that comes to mind? For most of us, power looks confident, power looks impressive, power might look strong, power looks like someone who knows exactly what they're doing. It's the person who walks into the room and everyone else goes quiet. Power looks like the expert, the leader, the one with all the answers. It doesn't usually look like hesitation, doesn't usually look like fear, doesn't look like someone saying, I'm not sure I'm quite the right person for this. It definitely doesn't look like an old man standing in front of the most powerful ruler in the world holding a stick. So our passage today starts at the end of Exodus chapter 6, starting in verse 28. Now when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I tell you. But Moses said to the Lord, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So I'm pretty good at giving reasons why things won't work. Anyone else? Not just me, right? Yeah? I don't think I'm particularly pessimistic. I would call it realistic. But realistically, I can look at many situations and think, yes, but here's the problem. I regularly will tell my wife, Amy, yes, but here's why this won't work. And right here at the end of Exodus 6, Moses does exactly the same thing. It says again, I'll remind you, now when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, I am the Lord, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I tell you. But Moses said to the Lord, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? And there we have it again. It's Moses talking himself out of what God has called him to do. And if we're honest, this is probably a very relatable moment, right? By the time we reach this point in the story, a lot has already happened. God has appeared to Moses in a burning bush. He's promised deliverance. He's given Moses signs. He's already sent him to Pharaoh once, and it didn't go so well. The people have lost hope. Pharaoh has increased the Israelites' workload. Moses feels like he's made everything worse. And now God speaks again. And notice that, God speaks again. God doesn't withdraw. God doesn't say, fine, I'll find someone else. God doesn't lower the calling. He simply repeats it. I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh everything I tell you. And then we get, but Moses said. He says, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? And this isn't new. Moses has already said this before. Back at the burning bush earlier in this chapter, in chapter 6, I'm not eloquent. I don't speak well. I'm not persuasive. Which is fascinating because actually Moses is currently in a conversation with God, and he seems to be doing quite well. But there's not always logic to our insecurities. And I'm not sure Moses is really talking about his lips. I think he's talking about his worth. What I have isn't enough. Who I am isn't enough. I'm not the right person. And here's the key thing here. Moses is measuring himself by Pharaoh's standards. Pharaoh is powerful. He's confident. Pharaoh commands attention and people listen to him. And Moses thinks, if I don't sound like that, if I don't look like that or lead like that, why would he listen to me? And we do this all the time. How often do we say those sorts of things? Why would anyone listen to me? I don't know enough. I'm not confident enough. I don't pray like that person. I don't speak like them. I don't have that kind of story. How many callings have died with the words, but I? But I'm too quiet. I'm too broken. But I'm too busy. But I've messed up too much. We're very good at disqualifying ourselves, often maybe before God's even finished speaking. And sometimes you might even think, maybe I'm just being humble. But being humble isn't denying what God can do through you. That's just insecurity dressed up as humility. Moses isn't being humble here. He's being afraid. And God doesn't argue with Moses about his faltering lips. God doesn't say, no, Moses, you're actually a really great speaker. You're really good at this. He simply says, I am the Lord. In other words, Moses, this is never about your ability. This was always about my authority. It's not about how impressive you are. This is always about who I am. God doesn't need Moses to be eloquent. He needs Moses to be available. And that's true for us today. Sometimes maybe people don't serve in church because they don't quite feel ready or capable. You might have been a Christian for 20 years and you don't feel ready. And at that point, I don't think it's, I'm not ready. I think we're waiting for a confidence that maybe will never come. And Moses doesn't wake up one morning suddenly thinking, you know what, actually, I think I am the perfect person for this job. Actually, I think I'll be brilliant at confronting Pharaoh. He goes scared. He goes unsure. But he goes obedient. And that's the point. And this speaks to us today, because God is still speaking. God is still sending us out. God is still calling people to speak truth into all sorts of places. Your workplace, the school gates, the coffee shop, with your neighbours, in the waiting room at the doctor's. But the biggest resistance is rarely out there. It's in here and here. God says speak and we say, but I. God says serve and we say, but I. God says step out and we say, but I. And every time God gently reminds us, I am the Lord. Not you are impressive, not you have it all together, just I am the Lord. And that's enough. God doesn't wait for our perfect confidence, he works with our obedience. So maybe the question for us today isn't, am I good enough? It's just simply that, will I trust that God is? Because when God says, I am the Lord, he's saying, you don't need to be. I am the Lord. So God keeps speaking, God keeps calling, and Moses keeps thinking, yes, but I'm not the right person. And God, in his patience, keeps responding. Let's read chapter 7, 1-7 now. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. So God opens with this sentence that must have completely floored Moses. I have made you like God to Pharaoh. Let's be clear, I don't think God is saying, Moses, you are God. I think this is about an authority that he gives to Moses. He's saying, Moses, when you speak, you represent my authority. Pharaoh thinks he is ultimate. Pharaoh thinks he speaks with divine power. Pharaoh thinks his word is final. And God says, no, mine is. And Moses, the man who feels inadequate, insecure, unimpressive, I believe it's wobbly, maybe in weak-kneed, I think Greg said this morning, wasn't it? He is chosen to be the mouthpiece of that authority. God's authority is not limited by our insecurity. Moses feels weak, God gives him authority. Moses feels unqualified, God gives him a job to do. God doesn't remove Moses' fear, he doesn't suddenly make him confident, doesn't magically turn him into a brilliant speaker, but God does give him help. He says, your brother Aaron will be your prophet. In other words, you don't have to do this alone. So many people burn out, give up, stay silent. Not maybe because God hasn't called them, but because they think they have to do it all on their own. We sometimes think calling equals isolation, but actually your calling can come with community. Moses has Aaron, Aaron has Moses. One speaks, one supports. And that's how we work as a church here. Some speak on the stage, some encourage quietly. By the way, there's many, many people that encourage quietly in this church. Some lead, some hold things together behind the scenes. And the truth is, we don't need to be everyone. We don't need to be all of those things. You just need to be faithful. And it also mentions their ages here as well. Moses is 80, Aaron is 83. Sometimes I think people take this as like, you keep serving, keep doing everything, even though you're old, doesn't mean you get a chance to stop. Keep going, keep going. We've got loads of people in this church who faithfully serve. I'm not going to name anyone because you're not old. No one's old. But those that might be a little bit older in age. But also with this, we can take here that it's not too late for you. You haven't missed your moment. God hasn't forgotten you. And if God can do this incredible thing with an 80-year-old who still doesn't feel ready, then there's hope for all of us. God can still do incredible things through you, whatever age you are. He can do incredible things through all of us. And God is completely upfront with Moses. He says, Pharaoh will not listen. There will be resistance. This won't be easy. God never says this will go smoothly. He says this will be worth it. And that matters because I think we naturally interpret resistance as failure. But God's purpose here is clear. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. This resistance from Pharaoh will lead to an incredible display of God's power. This is bigger than Moses. This is bigger than Pharaoh. This is bigger than Egypt. This is about God making himself known. So Moses feels inadequate and God gives him this authority. Moses feels alone and God gives partnership. Moses may even feel like he's past his best, but God says we're right on time. And Moses and Aaron do exactly what God asks. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not confidently, but obediently. God asks for obedience from us, and then he supplies the rest. So have you ever had a moment when you maybe finally pluck up the courage to do something new, take up a new hobby, set yourself a challenge or a goal, only for someone else to immediately say, oh yeah, that's nothing, I do that. We're going to go and climb Snowdon next year. Oh, that's amazing. When I climbed Everest, it was the most amazing thing I've ever done. Cool, thanks. Yeah, I've booked the Bournemouth 10K later this year. Oh, I did the half marathon last year. It's a great event. Oh, right, yeah, thank you very much. No, I didn't. No. But that feeling, that moment where what you thought was impressive suddenly doesn't look quite so impressive. Maybe feels a little bit ordinary. And that's the moment that we step into in these next few verses. Moses and Aaron have finally arrived where God has been sending them all along, standing before Pharaoh. God has spoken, God has called them, God has warned them that there will be resistance, and they're here in front of Pharaoh, and he says, fine, show me a sign. And this is the moment where God's power is put on display, and it doesn't look quite as special as we might have thought. So from verse 8, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Now this feels a bit anticlimactic, doesn't it? God performs this sign, and Pharaoh's magicians do the exact same thing. Now most of our English translations of the Bible say snake or serpent, but the Hebrew word for this here actually that's used is tannin. And tannin doesn't usually tend to depict like a small kind of garden snake. It's used elsewhere in the Bible to describe sea monsters, great beasts, terrifying creatures. Many people believe this sign wasn't just this harmless snake, but something maybe closer to a crocodile-like creature, a symbol of chaos, danger, power. And that maybe matters because in Egyptian culture, the serpent, snake, especially crocodile imagery, was very symbolic. Pharaohs wore serpent imagery on their crowns. Serpents represented divine authority and protection. Crocodiles were feared and even worshipped. So this sign may not be random. God here is speaking Pharaoh's language. God's saying, you think you control chaos? You think you command power? Watch this. And Aaron throws down his staff, and God turns a simple shepherd's stick into a symbol that directly challenges Egypt's gods. This is not a magic trick. This is a power encounter. And then comes the awkward bit. Pharaoh's magicians do the same thing. And the Bible doesn't say that they were faking it. It doesn't say that it was an illusion. It says they did it by their secret arts. So this seems to have actually happened. And the Bible is honest. There are real spiritual powers at work in the world that do not come from God. And that might be a little bit uncomfortable for us. But the Bible doesn't shy away from this. The spiritual world is real. And not everything supernatural is holy. Not every spiritual experience is from God. And this matters today because I think we live in a culture that is becoming increasingly fascinated by spirituality. Mediums, clairvoyance, tarot cards, manifestation, energy, the universe, all these things. And people go to these things for the same reason that Pharaoh would. Maybe for control, maybe for insight, maybe for comfort, for reassurance, for power. And sometimes it might work. We can't just pretend that this isn't real. But the story doesn't end with equal power. God snake and Pharaoh snake. No, it says that Aaron's snake, or his tannin, or serpent, swallows the others. It doesn't say it fights them. It doesn't say it outperforms them. It doesn't say it competes with them. It says it consumes them. This is the moment we mustn't miss here. God's power may not always look more impressive at first glance, but it is greater. Lesser powers imitate. God's power dominates. Lesser powers promise control. God's power brings freedom. Lesser powers impress, but God's power transforms. And Pharaoh sees it, but still refuses to surrender. Why? Because acknowledging God's power would mean relinquishing his own. So a question for us, if God's power is greater, why are people around us looking elsewhere? I did a quick Google Maps check, and there are at least 8 psychics, mediums, and the like within about a 10-minute drive of this building. Why are people going to mediums instead of the church? Why are they seeking spiritual answers without Jesus? Why do they believe other voices have more authority? Could it be not necessarily because God is weak, because he's not, but because we've stopped expecting him to act? Maybe we've learned to explain rather than demonstrate, to discuss rather than pray, sometimes even to be polite rather than powerful. And this is not about hype or kind of chasing experiences. This is about a church that believes that God is still alive, still active, still greater. And we need to point people towards Jesus. Aaron's staff was just a stick until God used it. Pharaoh's magicians had real power, but not ultimate power. Pharaoh's resistance did not stop God's plan, it revealed his power. So the question for us is simple: whose power are we trusting? And whose power are we showing? Because the world is searching, and we need to show them Jesus. When God reveals truth, the human heart must respond. There is no neutral ground. Soft hearts surrender, hard hearts resist. And Pharaoh is a really clear example of this. Pharaoh did not lack evidence. He did not lack signs. He did not lack clarity. What he lacked was willingness. Every time God reveals truth to Pharaoh, a choice is placed in front of him. And every time, Pharaoh chooses control over surrender. Pharaoh's story is not just ancient history. It's true today. Because the same God who revealed himself to Pharaoh reveals himself to us. Hebrews 3 verse 15 says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." Not tomorrow, not when life is calmer, not when you've got things together, today. When God speaks, something happens inside us. And some hearts say, "Yes, Lord, I trust you." And other hearts say, "Not yet. Not now. No thanks." Both are responses. Silence is a response. Delay is a response. Resistance is a response. God used a wooden staff to show his power over Pharaoh. And centuries later, God used a wooden cross to show his power over sin and death. Because the greatest display of God's power is not a staff becoming a snake. It's not the various plagues that we'll see still to come in this story. It's a cross. At the cross, God reveals truth about himself and about us. That we are broken. That sin separates us from God. But that he is holy. and that he loves us more than we could ever understand, that he sent Jesus to this earth, and that he died on that cross for you and for me. And just like Pharaoh, we stand before God's revelation and we must respond. Some look at the cross and surrender. Others look at the cross and turn away. 1 Corinthians chapter 1:18 says, "The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." Same message, different response. Soft hearts say, "I need a saviour." Hard hearts say, "I'll manage on my own." Soft hearts bow, hard hearts tighten their grip. And here's the good news. If your heart is stirring right now, if something inside you is being challenged or unsettled, that is God revealing truth. And revelation always demands a response. You do not have to have everything figured out. You do not have to sort your life out first. You do not have to sound confident or spiritual. Moses didn't. None of us have this all figured out. It's all by God's grace. Salvation begins the same way obedience began for Moses, by surrender. By saying, "Lord, I trust you more than I trust myself." 2 Corinthians 6, it says, "Now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. Not when you feel ready. Not when life slows down. Now." Because when God reveals truth, the heart must respond. The question is not whether or not God is speaking. The question is, how will you respond?
And that's where we find ourselves.